Hello and welcome to Fabled. I'm gonna make this channel very simple. It is me writing fantasy short stories with heavy inspiration from one movie. Each video will be a different movie and a different story. All of them unique, all of them original. However, they do draw inspiration from movies. So if you can guess the movie that inspired this story, write it down in the comments, and whoever gets it right first will be mentioned in the next video I make. With that said, find yourself some headphones. If you're at work, listen to it like an ebook. And if you're not, I put up some visuals for you as well. I hope you enjoy the story. If you make it to the end, please like, subscribe, and share the video. Enjoy. The Tale of the Blind Knight and the Deaf Merchant. Long ago in the kingdom of Croywin, where many have fallen into poverty, those new to poverty tried many things to improve their situations. Some even turned to crime, with the most desperate of those being violent. In this kingdom, the king's knights lived a better life than those beneath them on the social hierarchy, and previously, the former knights of the kingdom were granted a hefty pension to retire on. This was no longer the case for the former knights, once the crown felt it could no longer support those who once protected it. This was especially true for Sir Richard, a former knight of the crown, who up until recently was living on such a pension. However, while many of the retired knights found solace in newly gained employment, Sir Richard was at a disadvantage. You see, Sir Richard was blinded in battle against a powerful mage, which he fell by his own sword. He was pinned with a hero's medal and given a hero's pension, but the years have gone by, and the crown has long since forgotten his deed. Sir Richard now lives with his sister, Adele. Without her, he would be lost. She leads him around the city, helps him buy his goods and wares, and keeps him company. But no matter how much she loved him, she found that Sir Richard's company was becoming a burden. The former knight couldn't stop complaining about his new life situation, and so, when she found a job posting in the town square, she sent her brother to interview for the position. Sir Richard the Blind set out one morning without his sister's aid. He knew no self-respecting merchant would hire a blind man, and so, doing his best, he shuffled across the muddy streets, narrowly avoiding horse and carriage, on his way to the market. He knew the way by the smell. The street leading to the market reeked of bodily waste due to the excessive emptying of chamber pots by the larger-than-normal population who lived on that street. Once the horrid smell turned sweet with perfumes and fresh produce, he would know he's close. The town square was laid with brick, and the vendor stand that he was looking for would be near the entrance of the square. The air turned sweet. He felt brick underfoot. The ambient noise around was suddenly loud and chaotic. Customers traveled the square, merchants calling out to them with today's deals and steals. That's when he heard the keywords he needed. "Get your goods at the lion stand," a voice called over the rest. That was the stand he needed, the one hiring for a new helper. Richard the Blind ambled toward the call. "Hello?" came a gentle voice. It was the same one from the call he heard a moment ago. That confirmed he was at the right stand. "Hello?" Richard called out, unsure if the merchant was anywhere near the stand. The merchant's name was Gene. He too had a disabling lack of ability to his senses, but the sense he was missing was his hearing. He was deaf. Unable to hear, Gene did not notice Richard by the words he said, but by the way he leaned over the counter. "Can I help you?" Gene asked. "Yes. Is this the lion stand?" Richard asked, knowing the name by what Adele had told him. But in his blindness, he knocked a bottle off the counter with a gesture. "Yes," Gene said, having read Richard's lips, but knelt down to pick up the bottle, making it impossible for him to hear Richard's next words. "I'm here for the job posting you left in the square." Gene returned to his standing position, replacing the bottle on the stand. "What do you want?" Gene asked. 30, Richard answered. "What?" Gene sneered. 30 what? 30 coppers, Richard said, this time knocking a jar from the counter in a blind gesture of his hand. "I'll take 30 coppers a week for my work here at your stand," Richard continued again, unaware that Gene could not hear him as he knelt down yet again to retrieve the jar Richard had knocked to the ground. "Okay, what do you want?" Gene asked again as he rose back to position. 30, Richard snapped. 30 what? Gene snapped back. 30 coppers a week. What are you, deaf? Yes, Gene shouted, matching Richard's frustration. No, Richard laughed. "You're kidding me, right?" "No," Gene said. "You can't hear a thing I'm saying?" Richard tested. "No," Gene growled. "Then how do you know what I'm saying?" "I can read lips," Gene answered. "You couldn't see that?" "No," Richard answered. "I'm blind." Gene's brow creased. "You've got to be kidding me." Gene shook his head, his smirk growing as he saw the humor in the situation. They had gone their entire lives living in the same city and had yet to cross paths. That and the thought of the blind man working at the same merchant stand as a deaf man, there wasn't a word to describe such a situation. "So you want to work for me?" Gene asked after composing himself as a prospective employer. Yes, sir, Richard said, slowly and carefully exaggerating the movements of his mouth. You don't have to do that. I'm deaf, not dumb. Oh, Richard said. Sorry, I've never met somebody who couldn't hear. I've never met a blind man, Gene added. Tell you what, I got a delivery coming in, but the vendor can't be seen in the town square, so he's dropping the delivery around the corner. Can you go and pick it up? Does this mean I have the job? Richard asked. Maybe. We'll see how it goes, Gene answered. I know you won't steal from me because you should be easy enough to track down. The dark-skinned blind man. Ha, Richard laughed. He'll drop off at the base of the tower. There will be a red lion painted on the front of the crate, Gene explained. And so, Richard left the square for the tower. He waited nearly an hour until he heard a blood-curdling scream from the square. He wasted little time in returning to see the commotion, but when he arrived, the chaotic chatter and merchant calls weren't to be heard. The square was vacant, with exception to a woman that brushed against him as she left. Her perfume was perhaps the best he'd ever smelled. Sir? He called out for Gene. Gene, deaf, was standing in his stand on a stool, reading from a list of ingredients of one of his potions. What was that? Richard shouted in the direction of the lion stand. Gene finally finished reading the ingredients and turned only to find whomever he was reading the list to was gone. However, he did see Richard approaching quickly, and a lone lady with a red dress quickly leaving the square. Her legs were something to remember. Richard? You're back, Gene said. There was a man here looking for you. All right, Richard answered, but what was that scream? I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. There was a man here who was looking for you. He became suddenly interested in the ingredients of the top shelf potion and... Richard suddenly tripped. It was enough for Gene to stop mid-sentence. He couldn't see his new acquaintance, so he rounded the counter of his stand. But what he saw was not what he expected. Richard was lying on top of a portly man, the man who had asked him about Richard and the potion ingredients. His white tunic painted red with blood, and a pool of blood continued to grow beneath him. Oh no! Gene shouted and rushed to the fallen man's aid. He grabbed the sword from the ground and checked the man for breath, but none could be felt. Suddenly, Richard heard a call from behind. Drop the weapon! An unfamiliar voice, followed by footfalls of armored sabaton on brick to his left and right. The singing of steel as two swords were pulled from their sheaths. Sir? Richard tapped on Gene's shoulder. Yeah? Are you holding a weapon? Yeah, Gene answered, and then gasped when he saw the two city guards circling. Can you fight? No? Gene shook his head. Give me the weapon. You're blind. Uh-huh, Richard said. Now give it to me. Gene handed Richard the sword, and Richard sprung to his feet, sword ready at hand. The guards didn't hesitate to attack. The first guard, the one on the left, lunged with his bastard sword, a jab attack. And luckily for Richard, a poorly aimed one. Whoa! Gene cried, Duck! Suddenly, Richard followed the command and heard the sword sing over his head as the second guard made his attack. The two guards pressed their attacks, but Richard stepped to the right and in his haste slipped in the pool of the dead man's blood. Again, a sword swung down on him, but missed by inches as he tumbled back to the ground. He flipped himself up and suddenly felt an arm grab hold of him under his own. Alarmed, he tried to spin on his heel. Gene's voice came to him. It's me! 10 o'clock! Gene shouted with urgency. Richard brought his sword to 10 and felt it hit something else, and it clanged as it did, quickly followed by a disgruntled grumble from one of the guards. 5! Gene cried. And again Richard spun. This time his sword hit something more hollow than the last, and it was quickly followed with a groan. Gene's weight suddenly left Richard's side, and he heard the armored footfalls quickly approaching. But when he was certain a sword would soon find its mark somewhere on his person, instead there was a loud clatter of armor falling on brick, followed by several blows of rock on steel. Sir? Richard called out, uncertain of the situation. I'm here, Gene answered. Grab the coin from the tip box, Gene told him. The guards are out for now, but we need to get out of here. Guards? Richard shrieked. City guards? Yeah, Gene confirmed. They aren't dead, just out cold. Richard soon heard the jingle of coins being poured into a sack. By the way, Gene said, grabbing Richard by the arm, my name's Gene. The two fled from the square and from the city into the wood and soon a neighboring village. We're wanted men, Richard complained as the sun gave its last over the horizon. I know, Gene said, but we can't turn ourselves in. That man was wealthy, probably a nobleman. You said he was looking for me? Yes. He asked for you. Did you know him? I'm not sure. What did he look like? "Oh, right," Gene said and tried his best to describe the man. Large, portly, and sweaty. Very sweaty. "Rollings, I think," Richard said. "It smelled like Rollings, anyway." "No, he wasn't a nobleman, but he was plenty wealthy." "What did he do?" "He was a broker. I owed him a pretty large amount of money." "Well then, we're in real trouble. That's motive. The governor is going to think we killed him." "But surely somebody saw what happened." "Not that I know. The square was pretty empty by the time your friend came by. I don't think there was anybody else when he was killed." Richard sighed and dropped his head into his hands. "What are we going to do?" "Well, I didn't quite see what happened, but there was only 4 people in the square when I turned around. Me, your dead friend, you, and a beautiful set of legs in a red dress." Rubbing his forehead with the mention of the woman in red, something occurred to him. "You're right," Richard snapped his fingers. "There was a woman. I smelled her perfume. It had to have been the best perfume I've ever smelled." "Okay," Gene said. "So we're looking for a woman with great legs and smells just as great. Doesn't really narrow our search." "I know," Richard said. "I can smell her perfume right now, so it can't be as rare as I'd like it." Richard didn't know, but at that time, the woman in red was strutting her way toward the two, with a gentleman by her side. Gene could see, though, and upon gazing at the two, couldn't help but look down at her perfect legs. When the reality of the situation hit him, it was too late. "Hello, boys," the gentleman said. "I think you might have something that belongs to us." A hand grabbed Richard by the shoulder. The grasp was light and feminine. "Gene?" "It's her," Gene confirmed slowly. Richard rose to his feet, but the hand pushed him back down. "It seems, in my rush, I left without getting what I came to your stand for," she said, staring deep into Gene's eyes. "You see, our mutual acquaintance was carrying something very special for me, and, well, he seems to have misplaced it." "What?" Richard asked. "It was a gold coin," the gentleman answered. "You haven't seen no coins, have you?" Richard swallowed. He was carrying the coin purse from the stand. "Give us the coin, and you two live to see another day," the man threatened. "Just give them the purse," Gene ordered. Richard gulped again and nodded, reaching down for the coin purse when he felt the sharp point of a sword at his back. His hand shook as he grasped the purse and lifted it to the brigand to take. There was a snicker from the brigand as he took the purse, and the click of a tongue from the lady in red. "See you around, boys," she called back as the two strut away. Gene watched as the two walked deeper into the village. "You know, we need them." "What?" Richard sighed. "We need those two," Gene answered. "The city guard will have a bounty on our head, and the news of that bounty will spread across the kingdom. We need to get those two to admit that they are the ones at fault." "Gene," Richard said, "they're murderers. Even if we go after them, we won't be much of a match." "We fought 2 highly trained, heavily armored city guardsmen and lived," Gene said. "But we won't have anywhere to live if we don't go after that brigand and that lady." Richard sighed and buried his head in his hands once again. After a moment of deep thought, he said, "Okay, what's the plan?" "Great," Gene said. "So as they approached our camp, the lady was talking to her companion. She said something about the Hilltop Manor." "Hilltop Manor?" Richard said, instantly recognizing the name of the property. "That is the home of Lord Zerbe. I've only heard of him, never met him, but from what I've heard, he's a pretty shady character. I wouldn't put it past him to have such people in his employ." "So then," Gene said, "I guess we know where they're going." Richard smiled. The sun had long since set by the time our duo arrived on the outer perimeter wall of the Hilltop Manor. The two spotted a trio of dogs and a single entrance unguarded by any of Lord Zerbe's men. "Hey, hand me that sword," Gene said. "You stay here. Distract the dogs. I will go in and get the coin. Once we have the coin, they have no choice but to come to us, and that's when we will have them right where we want them. If we tell the captain of the guard our story, and they come for the coin, then our story will be validated." "I got it," Richard said. "Go." Once Gene had traveled far enough away for Richard to no longer smell him, he blew a long, loud whistle, and he was answered with a smattering of barks. He could hear the dogs race over to the wall, and they continued to bark up at him as he continued to antagonize them. There was some noise in the distance, but nothing too alarming. That is, until he felt a pressure squeezing his hand on the rock wall. "Hello!" The voice of the brigand. Richard was taken into the brigand's custody and led off the wall, through the field, and to the top of the hill into the manor. Richard stood in the manor. He heard the brigand speaking to his left, and an unfamiliar voice in front of him. The man spoke with an upper-class dialect, and when the brigand decided to alter whatever deal the two of them had, the lord of the manor ended the negotiation with a loud bang of a flintlock. Richard finally began to understand that Lord Zerbeh had killed his brigand, and with that, he started to see his potential fate if he didn't fight back. Zerbeh fired another round at Richard, missing but not by much. But why did he miss? At this short distance, Richard was the easiest target even for the highly inaccurate flintlock pistol. He found himself wondering, and the thought was more of a burden, increasingly gnawing at him until he broke the silence to ask, "Are you blind?" Zerbeh laughed. "It's not as debilitating as you've been led to believe." Bang! Another shot from the flintlock. This one also missing, just barely, as Richard threw himself to the floor. Immediately, Richard pat the floor in search of the brigand's sword. He found it, but another shot narrowly missed him. Cautiously, Richard rose to his feet, unknowingly mere feet from the blind lord. Both weapons pass in front of their prospective targets, but neither knows to strike. The charade only happens for a second, when Richard stumbles over the dead brigand and falls to the floor, losing his grip on the sword. Suddenly, Jean called out, "Richard?" And with his call came the familiar scent of the lady in red. The lady sees her former partner lying dead on the floor. Richard, hiding nervously nearby, also on the floor. Jean asks Richard what has happened, and Richard mouths the words, "The Lord is blind," without making a sound, obviously still concerned with being located by the Lord. The lady confronts Zerbeh, and the Lord assures her he would never betray her, but his words aren't enough. The lady fires a flintlock of her own at the Lord the moment he raised his, and he is killed, falling through the wall and tumbling off the sheer cliff on the other side. The lady snatched up the coin and quickly took her leave. Instead of killing the two, she left them to be discovered by the authorities with two more dead in their midst. She hurries for the woods, but Jean isn't having it. Jean takes Richard's jacket, and the two slide down a long cable in hopes of cutting her off before she can make her escape. Richard drops the moment Jean calls for it. "Now!" And he falls on top of the fleeing lady. Jean drops a moment later to land on the waiting accomplice, and a struggle ensues. Richard soon gets the advantage over the lady, even gaining control of the gold coin once again. The accomplice, on the other hand, manages to slip free from Jean's grip, but Jean managed to wrestle a knife from the man before he could flee for a nearby horse. Jean commanded the man to stop, knife raised high, ready to throw, but the man didn't listen. Unknown to Jean, a large group of King's Knights have arrived behind him. The fleeing man stops the moment the knights order it. Unable to hear, Jean thinks the man is finally taking his threats to heart, and so he orders the man to come back. The man does so only because the knight captain ordered it as well. When the man passes Jean, Richard grabs Jean's hand and Jean turns. "The authority is here," Richard informs his friend. Jean turns to see the knight captain, with several lesser knights at his side, along with Adele, Richard's sister, waiting behind him. The knight captain, Captain Braddock, takes the lady in red and her accomplice into custody, binding their hands with a rope tied to a cart. When Braddock speaks, Richard smiles. "Braddock?" The captain turns and his face lights up. "Sir Richard the Blind." "How?" Richard laughed. "Last I saw you, you were knee-deep in the Badlands staring down death. I think you'll find I'm pretty resilient." After catching up with a friend from his past, Richard informed Braddock of all that has happened, and Braddock accepts the story, knowing Richard's true character. Braddock wishes Richard, Jean, and Adele the best, and takes his leave with his party. Though they had only known each other for 2 days, the ordeal they had suffered and the adventure they shared was one that forged a true bond, and the two lived on as the greatest of friends. The criminals faced justice and were locked away for good, and the deaf-blind duo lived on to find a happy life selling goods from their newly purchased shop in the town square, one purchased with a single gold coin. The end. I hope you enjoyed that story. Again, if you know the movie that was used for inspiration for this story, comment down in the comment section. And if you get it right, I'll mention you in the next video that I make. Also, if you made it this far, please like, share, and subscribe. It would greatly help me in making this. And as always, thanks for watching.